On this week's Carrier App, we will look at recent quarterly results from Verizon and Sprint, as well as speak with Roger Entner from Recon Analytics for insight into those numbers and the influence licensed spectrum has on the U.S. economy. Well, thanks for joining us in this week's Carrier App. I'm your host, Dan Meyer, editor-in-chief at RCR Wireless News, and joining me this week, as always, is our managing editor, Sean Kinney. Hey, Sean, thanks for joining us this week. We appreciate it.
Dan, always a pleasure. Lots of news to talk about today.
Yes, a lot of news over the past week. We've had some carrier results, Verizon last week and Sprint obviously this week, and some other stuff happening in the market. So let's start with, I guess, the Sprint stuff. They came out with some numbers today. I don't know if obviously it just came out this morning, so we haven't had a lot of chance to digest a lot of it here. But what's your general overall view, what you saw from the Sprint stuff this morning?
Well, Dan, I went through your report on the specifics of the numbers, and I mean, it came across as fairly mediocre from my perspective. They did have some net additions, but nothing in comparison to what Verizon did same quarter, and Sprint, nothing in comparison to what they did from the same quarter the previous year. So I don't know. What was the reception on the call? Was it touted as good news? How are they selling it?
Yeah, it's tough. It was Sprint, obviously, like you were saying, the numbers-wise, they came out with some – the numbers were respectable. They weren't, again, like you said, they were definitely down from last year, down even sequentially from last quarter. But they did manage to grow some of the more lucrative postpaid phone net additions, which is, most analysts look at that as being, a good ad there. So, but overall, the numbers weren't impressive. Sprint has, kind of gotten used to this to an extent. So they did manage to try to sell as best as they could. But again, I think the numbers overall, even considering the fact that there were a lot of promotions during the fourth quarter last year, in the last 3 months of last year, obviously with their 50% off promotion, it seemed like they were getting some good traction with that, again, with the phone net ads, and their churn numbers were pretty good, at least on the postpaid side. So it did seem like they were getting some good numbers, and they did tout that on the call, the fact that they were getting some good traction there. But again, the numbers weren't outstanding, and I think analysts, perhaps analysts, their expectations were kind of, being subdued a bit because it is Sprint. But I think, it wasn't a breakout quarter, obviously, for them again, but at least a good solid quarter. I mean, again, they're still, working through a lot of issues. I think their biggest boost came from just the fact that they kind of shot down the issue about, their network program. Obviously, I think we've talked about it before, like last week, obviously, about the report that came out about that, and they seem to kind of try to shoot that down as best they could. We'll see how that happens. But I guess, what was your kind of view of what you saw coming out of that part of it, at least?
Well, did I hear correctly that Marcelo Clay actually called out a guy from Recode about the report?
Yes. The person from Recode on the call there asked a question about kind of following up on their story, basically. And Marcelo kind of came out, he was very pointed in his comments about that report being incorrect. And it did a lot of damage to Sprint stock, obviously. So it was, I wouldn't say it was a tense moment, but it was definitely a pointed comment from Marcelo, who's been traditionally fairly relaxed on these calls. So, he did come out and kind of make a point of that, which was interesting.
But I guess my big takeaway was after, hearing everything about what they're doing on the network infrastructure side on the call this morning, and then putting that into the context of everything we've heard over the past year about a small cell driven densification plan, I am still totally confused as to what they are actually going to do. They've come out with this new phrase, macro minis. So I guess if I understood that correctly, they're not necessarily going to aggressively decommission macro sites as a way to save money, but they are going to do a very close analysis of their macro sites as they fit into the larger network plan. And they are going to look at densification through these macro mini sites, which I'm not really clear if that is the same thing as a small cell or if it's something slightly different. I'm really not sure. Do you have any clarity on that?
Yeah, I guess I would say they're pretty much just small cells of what they're doing. I think this might be a little more high-powered small cells that are going to be outdoors is their plan. So, whatever word you want to use for what those are, metro sites or metro cells or whatever they're going to be. But that's kind of the interesting part of it still is, there was comments about them decommissioning a lot of their macro sites. They did come out on the call and say, we're not doing that. We're actually probably going to be building out some more macro sites. But at the same time, they were saying they were going to, kind of investigate, the need for all these sites. And They're going to work with their the rural carrier partners as well. So, yeah, it still seems like we haven't got quite the full answer on what's actually going to happen. And they were, questions were asked to them about this, and they, kind of danced around the answer a bit. They tried to clarify the point that they weren't strictly just decommissioning sites, which I think just to kind of, kind of soothe the view out there. But yeah, I still think we're kind of up in the air a bit on what's actually going to happen and what they're going to do. I think there's still that kind of uncertainty there, which I think is going to overhang Sprint until they kind of clarify exactly what they're going to do. And they've been clearing out management left and right there, bringing new people in, and it seems like the new people, aren't quite ready to talk a lot about what's happening. So it's an interesting period we're going through with Sprint in terms of kind of what they're going to be doing. It looks like.
Yeah, and I don't really know how to approach that, because you would think, based on that Recode report about the decommissioning at the macro layer, I mean, that sent their stocks down 9%. That's a huge amount of money, as Claret, articulated to the Recode guy on that call. So you would think, okay, if that's the situation, Sprint, it's time to very carefully delineate for public consumption what your network plan is. But they didn't do that, which I just thought was unadvisable at best. Further on that infrastructure thing, I did take note that they're looking at a hybrid backhaul mechanism, and they're going to start deploying more microwave backhaul, which is, I interpret that as a cost-saving measure, because obviously fiber is expensive. If you're going to deploy 50,000 of these macro minis, you're talking about a huge cost for, not just for running fiber, but for leasing existing fiber from the level 3s and Zios of the world. So I got to assume that the preference for microwave isn't based on actual network functionality, but based on cost. So I did take note of that.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Yeah, they brought that up, and that's going to be a big part for them, because obviously their CTO now, John Saw, came from the old Clearwire days, and at Clearwire was almost 100% reliant on microwave backhaul. So I think they've got a good understanding of how microwave backhaul works. There's always a lot of concern about microwave not, providing the support and the level of performance as fiber, and perhaps it doesn't at the very top end. But for what Sprint is looking to do, I think they're pretty comfortable with how microwave will work. Again, they have a lot of expertise in that field, and they're also talking about using their own 2.5 spectrum for a lot of these small cell deployments for the backhaul for that part. Which, talking to people about that last week, there was some concern that Sprint is so dependent upon that 2.5 for their commercial service that it might be odd for them to then try to tap some of that to provide backhaul when they could in turn try to use it for more commercial on the commercial side of things. So yeah, we'll see how that all plays out. But yeah, they did mention on the call that obviously the cost associated with fiber is a big issue for them right now, and having to deal with Verizon's and AT&T's and level 3s of the world. There's a lot of ongoing costs, and obviously with microwave, there's more upfront costs involved, but the ongoing costs are lower for them. So that, I guess what they're kind of looking at doing is maybe paying a little more upfront, but then just kind of amortizing the costs over the long term of it. So we'll see how that plays out. But that was an interesting commentary on what they said.
Yeah, and then I also I can't help but notice that the larger backdrop here is this $2.5 billion cost-cutting plan. Yeah. One of the drivers of that is losing staff at the customer service call center level. And so right now, I think what they're trying to do is lay off 2,500 people before January 30th, which is when changes to their severance structure. So they're trying to be, generous to the extent that the situation allows by getting those people off the books before the severance package becomes less advantageous.
Yeah.
But at the same time, our editor, Martha DeGrasse, reported this morning that they have something like 1,300 open positions that they're advertising for. So that's a bit of a mixed message. I will point out, though, that these are different types of jobs. These 2,500 in cuts are, like I said, aimed at the customer service touch point, whereas a lot of these 1,300 positions that are being advertised are more on the network RF side. So they are different, but in the grand scheme of things, jobs and FTEs cost money. So they're kind of at loggerheads with their self in that regard. But it was an interesting earnings call. And when I think we get AT&T later this week, right?
Yeah, agencies later on this afternoon. Yeah, they'll be later this week. Obviously, we'll get some more insight from them. And again, last week we had Verizon come out with their results, and again for Verizon, their numbers are always, again for them always very steady. They showed some really good numbers on the postpaid side. Prepaid, they lost customers during the last 3 months of last year. Also, something that Sprint showed as well. Sprint lost a lot of customers on the prepaid side. So it'll be interesting to see from both AT&T. T-Mobile's already kind of pre-announced their numbers. They didn't really provide a lot of insight on their prepaid side, but it's looking like from what Verizon and what Sprint are announcing, at least on the prepaid side, that Cricket, which is part of AT&T, and Metro PCS, which is part of T-Mobile, could show some pretty good growth for the quarter. Again, we'll see what the numbers come out to be, but it seems like at least that it's setting up well for at least the prepaid side for those two to kind of really show some good growth there, which is interesting kind of turn of events there, because those two were obviously, as they were being merged into the new ownership, there was a lot of in and out of customers there, but it looks like there's a lot of growth potential for those guys on the prepaid side at least. So see how that plays. And it was interesting too, not to keep talking here, but I know Sprint that was asked about the prepaid business, and Marcelo was kind of saying that hey, we're not going to chase customers that are not profitable for us or less profitable. So that was kind of their excuse for losing customers. But he also did mention that they're going to focus more in the near term on their Boost Mobile division, which today came out with some new pricing plans, and less emphasis in the short term on Virgin Mobile, with the plan at some point going forward to kind of reposition Virgin in a new way. So we'll see how that plays out, because for Sprint, they've had multiple prepaid brands for years now, and it's always been kind of odd how they position those, kind of emphasizing one over the other, kind of back and forth. And so it seems like perhaps now at this point they're going to try to clarify that to an extent, and maybe get that part at least taken care of a bit, and kind of get their prepaid business maybe a little more in line, it looks like.
Yeah, well, maybe next week, once all of these quarterlies are out, we can have this conversation again and have the benefit of a full comparative picture.
Yeah, exactly. Well, again, another big strong week in terms of carrier news, and obviously the results coming out of Sprint. We'll see what happens again going forward. Like we've been talking about, I think we'll hear some more, hopefully some more clarity on what their plans are. Because again, like you were saying, I think they need to provide some more clarity. I think today they had a nice bounce back on their stock price, but I think investors are still going to be a little more worried about what their long-term plans are. And I think, like you said, I think it's a great point. I think they need to provide some more clarity on what their plans are going to be there, just to kind of ease everybody's concerns there going forward. But I know on the topic as well, I also had a chance to speak with Roger Entner on the topic too, and we touched on the Sprint stuff. We also touched on Verizon's results, and also Roger did a recent report for CTIA, which is an industry trade organization, kind of comparing what kind of value comes out of freeing up additional spectrum resources. Obviously, the FCC's got a spectrum auction coming up, and CTIA is the carrier representative, and they're very big on this as well. So we talked a bit about what he found in his report there on kind of the value to the nation's economy of freeing up spectrum. So very good insight there. But hey, again, Sean, thanks for taking time to talk today, and let's take a look at that interview with Roger now. And joining this week is Roger Entner from Recon Analytics to talk a bit about some carrier news and some spectrum stuff. So hey, Roger, thanks for joining us this week. We appreciate it.
Hey, thank you.
Great
Good to be here.
Good deal. Well, hey, let's start off with some carrier results. We had Verizon here recently, and then more recently we had Sprint. I don't know which one of those is more appealing to you to perhaps kick off a conversation with them. Obviously, both had some interesting numbers.
Well, I think both are very interesting, because every carrier now in the industry is in a different spot.
Yeah.
And, different competition means you are trying different things.
Yeah.
And it has driven the companies into different positions and different levels of execution and planning as create different results.
Yeah. I mean, it does seem like obviously with Verizon's results and kind of through their conference call, they are obviously focused more on AT&T, it seems like, as their main rival, and probably even more so the cable companies and companies like that, kind of the bigger companies. Did it seem like, from looking at their results, how are they doing, you think, in terms of maintaining that kind of pressure on those larger companies?
Well, for them, AT&T obviously is the big competitor.
Yeah.
When you look at market share, the only one that's close to them is AT&T.
Yeah.
T-Mobile, Sprint are roughly half of them.
Yeah.
So for them, it's much more interesting to compare themselves against AT&T, even though AT&T is at a completely different spot than Verizon is. But Verizon is performing, I think, very, very well. They are trading ads for profits to a certain extent, but much less so than they have to. They're still have the network differentiation of having the best network, even though that the competition is nipping at their heels and yapping and very loud about what progress they have made. And the good news is everybody has made progress.
Yeah.
So the network advantage that Verizon has enjoyed has certainly become smaller, but they're still executing very well.
Yeah.
Where they have done also very well is capturing the premium segment, the most affluent customers, and that segment is aging, like all of us, you know. And they're seeing that too, and they want to rejuvenate their customer base. That's where that drive towards millennials and all of that come, which, you know, T-Mobile derides left and right, because that's actually T-Mobile's customer base. It's in their own best interest to deride something that focuses on their customer base. But I think they have to be careful, because the millennials also spend less than their customer base and are less profitable than their customer base. Yes, it's the future and they will get more affluent, but you don't want to get too far ahead of yourself. And yes, it's the widest carrier based on customer base in the US, but again, it's they're also lower spending or customers. So from that perspective, you have to balance that. And I think Verizon overall does a very balanced approach.
Yeah.
And we have to remember, Verizon gets predominantly rewarded and punished by Wall Street based on profitability.
Yeah.
That's the number one number that they are looking for. And if that means more subscribers or more subscriptions and connections, great.
Yeah.
But imagine they would have 2 million customers and massive losses. They would get so punished, which is a freedom that if you're not Verizon or not AT&T, you have that to a much greater degree. You get rewarded on net ads.
Yeah.
And we saw that today at Sprint.
Yeah, that's a good point. You're right. Yeah, I mean, obviously, the questions that are asked to Verizon's management are much different than ones that are asked to T-Mobile and Sprint. I mean, they obviously, like you said, look at margins and profits and things like that. Where you're right, T-Mobile, Sprint do get the benefit of the doubt. Where hey, just add numbers, we just want net ads. So that's yeah. And obviously, so we have. I mean, with Sprint today, I mean, again, they're kind of at the, I don't want to say the opposite end of the market there from Verizon, but they're obviously at a different position than Verizon. And what did you see from their numbers today?
Well, I think from their numbers, if you have an improving network with half off compared to the competition, if you don't grow with that, I don't know what will make you grow. When we look at Sprint, I quickly calculated their cash cost per user, and that's $11.60. So as long as they get more than $11.60 from a customer, it's positive contribution. It's to their profitability.
Yeah.
So that's the answer to the question: how low can they go? $11.60.
And that is a question. You're right. That is a question that was asked. Because again, like the 50% off thing, that was brought up again today during their call. Hey, how profitable is that, and can that be sustained? But I think they also mentioned too that at least the CEO was mentioning that even though they are offering 50%, most customers perhaps aren't getting 50% off. Most customers are in turn just increasing their data bucket to perhaps closer to what they were paying before. So they're not seeing half of the revenue coming in. But, at some point.
That's the lure in.
Yeah.
And in 2 years, when these prices change, it's a big question if they stay or not. Yeah. There's a customer base that is intensely loyal to the lowest price at whatever carrier they can get that. Yeah. And so enjoy it while you have them, and recognize that a Verizon, a T-Mobile, an AT&T, their cash cost per user is in the $6 and $7 range. So it's a dangerous game when you're the lowest price provider, but not the lowest cost provider, because the competition can squeeze you.
That's a good point.
You will lose.
Yeah.
So in a race to the bottom, Sprint is not going to be the winner.
True. Obviously, their ownership there has been stressing cost savings as much as possible, trying to trim wherever they can. Obviously, layoffs and networks and things like that. So yeah, you're right. That's a dangerous game for them to be playing.
It's a dangerous game. When you're going through layoffs, morale usually doesn't go up. Where my concerns come in is like when you read some trial balloons in the press about their network plans. That's flirting with disaster. They need a good, reliable network. Yeah. Verizon has showed it from day one that a good network makes a difference. Then AT&T spend ungodly amounts of money to catch up. Yeah. T-Mobile spend significantly to catch up, and they're all reaping the rewards of it. Lower churn. Right now, Sprint is also reaping the rewards from, 5 years, pardon the dust.
Yeah.
It's you don't want to add to it and then rip out a couple of cell sites for marginally lower cost. You want to have a stable network, especially if you have a history of not executing on your network plans.
Yeah.
And what was really good on the call is that they finally talked about it again, that they want to do fiber.
Yeah.
And fiber and especially the backhaul over microwave.
Yeah.
And that will be really the key of cutting cost.
Yeah.
It's not, running to the FCC and complaining about special access. It's about getting rid of special access and doing fiber and doing microwave, because that's what everybody else has done.
Yeah.
And they have lowered their prices substantially. If you look through the T-Mobile earnings calls last year, they said, if I remember correctly, we lowered our cost to operate by 34% by cutting backhaul costs and things like that.
Yeah.
Well, if they can do it, so can Sprint. And it's execute, get with the time, get fiber. Every consumer wants to have fiber to the home. If it's good for the consumer at home, it's maybe good for the cell side too.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Obviously, Sprint has been trying to follow the T-Mobile model to an extent, and that's you're right on the network side of things. That might be probably the most important part for them to follow, because over T-Mobile, Neville Ray and his crew there have done a tremendous job. They had a nice head start. They got some money from AT&T and some spectrum from AT&T, and were able to really run with that and really do something significant. And now it seems like Sprint. Obviously, they've had some turnover in their CTO department and stuff.
Well, they had complete turnover. I think barely anybody is left at that senior leadership suite.
Yeah.
I think you can count them on one hand.
Yeah.
So it's a completely new leadership team. You can't blame it on the old guys anymore if it fails, because there's nobody left. And yes, Neville and T-Mobile, they have executed extremely well, and I've said it so many times. T-Mobile gets a lot of kudos for its marketing and innovativeness, where they did at least as much and don't get the kudos for internal execution. Yeah. Much better company, much better run company than it was on any of its predecessors. Yeah. And the two come together and you have magic. But yes, it's the Sprint should follow the T-Mobile playbook, lowering price, get people in, and ride it that way to profitability. Yeah. Ideally, you throw in a couple of interesting things, but a lot of consumers are responding on price. And when you have network, when you get closer to network parity, yeah, you have price matters more. And I think that's a motivation behind Verizon talking so much about 5G. Yeah. Because one of the secrets of Verizon's success is whenever there was a technology change, Verizon was first to market. They did extremely well. They did it at 4G, did it at 3G, and profited handsomely for it. So that's why they and it's an open secret. Yeah. That's why you have in this country this rush, at least Verizon and AT&T, to 5G, because they realize if they are first and they execute well, consumers will and customers will follow. Yeah. And the one who's the furthest behind, the bear will catch up.
Yeah, exactly. It used to be fastest than the slowest guy. That's all you have to do. So, but yeah, you're right. I mean, obviously Verizon, and they've always had that kind of the history of always being run by network guys. I mean, they've had guys run up through the ranks there who've always been connected to the network and really cognizant of the fact that network is important. And so, yeah, it seems like their focus has always been on making sure that the network was tops, or at least, being first in innovation and stuff. So, yeah, it seems like they've had that kind of history too.
Well, not necessarily network guys, but people who are very attuned to the network message and realizing that that's the difference. It goes all the way back to Bell Atlantic Mobile in the 1980s with Denny Striegel and Dick Lynch. Their motto then in the 80s was the difference is in the network. And the difference is in the network. Yeah. The cost differences between the carriers are now so small that you don't want to tolerate a bad network anymore. They can't give you enough off to make it worthwhile because you're paying already so little.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I talked to somebody about that. They were saying that, even if you improve your coverage in one area, if you lose coverage in another area, that is a negative. I mean, it's not a one-to-one swap. You can't say I'm better here and worse here and think it's equal. If you're better here, and lose there, you've lost two positions. I mean, you can't be worse anywhere else. You always have to be better.
Yes. The big mantra is always that the network nowhere can get worse. And that was the secret behind Sprint's challenges with network vision, where they were too optimistic with the approval process through the municipalities, and then gaps appeared in the network, and that's simply intolerable. Consumers are simply not standing for it, and they leave. Now at Sprint you're down to the hardcore, and it's getting better. That's
it seems like nowadays too. I mean, obviously, we kind of lived through the number portability implementation. I mean, when number portability came out, that really made it easier for customers to leave. And now with carriers offering to pay pretty much for you to leave your other carrier, there's really nothing connecting a customer to a carrier anymore, financially at least. You can leave, take your number, take your phone, and just walk into another carrier, and there you go. So there's no hindrance anymore.
But look what happens. Churn went down.
True.
That, and a lot of the consumer advocates say, oh, the carriers are such horrible people. They're torturing customers, screwing them over, all of these things. And the easier carriers make it through competition
Mm-hmm.
to change and switch carriers, the lower the churn.
Yeah.
If it would be that horrible, churn would have gone up,
Yeah.
not down.
Yeah.
So that shows me that carriers are actually doing a really good job. When you have the choice between switching to another carrier, getting $300, your phone's paid off, and all of these things, and you still stay. You know,
What can you say about? Yeah, I mean, you're right. That's just that's the way it's going to be for those customers. They don't want to leave, obviously, but yeah,
the people who want to leave can leave
yeah,
anytime.
yeah, yeah. Maybe one. Yeah, I mean, maybe one final thing on the Sprint topic. I mean, obviously, I think we kind of hinted to it a bit. You know, they had some news come out recently about their network plans. I mean, what was your general view of kind of what was said and maybe the response from Sprint today about that? I mean, what do you think happened there over the past week or so? I mean, obviously, their stock took a big dive, but
well, I think they put a trial balloon up, okay, and it got shot down in flame. I think any halfway rational person would have figured it out that isn't a smart idea, and they paddled back pretty quickly.
Yeah.
So if Sprint continues to execute, almost by default, this year will be a good year for Sprint.
Sure.
Next year, completely different story.
Yeah.
Because the initiatives that are and how the network gets implemented, all of these things will play a big role.
Yeah.
But I think that the fears of Sprint going bankrupt and all of that are plainly exaggerated and over the top.
Yeah.
Is the company in a happy place financially? No, not at all. But all the soothsaying will not. Look at it this way. SoftBank invested $22 billion, plus then I don't know how many, a lot of billions since then.
Yeah.
They're not gonna over $1 billion here, over a couple billion there. Gonna let that company go belly up and give it with a kiss to the bondholder. When at the same time they're investing $2 billion a year in India.
Yeah.
And Masu-san saying, if we do anything, we'll up that pace. No matter how well they will do in India, it will not make up for 20-something, $30 billion write-off.
Yeah.
So SoftBank cannot let them go belly up.
Yeah.
The worst thing that can happen is they run it like a DCF model, a discounted cash flow model, like paging companies. And you might not believe it. Paging companies are still around. And they're still profitable.
Yeah.
And
you're right. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, that does make sense. You're right. I mean, they've invested a lot there, and I'm sure they'll figure out a way to kind of make that an ongoing business. I mean, there's too many valuable assets still involved with Sprint. I mean, obviously, even just the spectrum alone is worth
way more, worth more than that.
Yeah. And, well, maybe speaking of spectrum, let's talk a quick different topic as well. I mean, obviously, I know you came out with a new report actually just today. Really interesting numbers. Looking at kind of as we're leading up to a new spectrum auction coming up, looking at the impact that freeing up licensed spectrum is having on the U.S. economy. I know this has been talked about kind of for off and on for several years now. The importance of licensed spectrum. Obviously, CTIA, Industry Trade Organization, has been really big behind this. Really talking to Steve about it. Maybe talk a bit about what you found in your latest report, because it does seem like, I mean, there's some big numbers that came out of your report on this.
Yes, indeed. And so I'm working with CTI for last 10 years. I think this is the 5th report in quantifying the impact of the wireless industry on the U.S. economy. And we look at the impact of licensed spectrum in the hands of carriers. And when we look at the 10-year average, and that's the conservative number here, over the 10-year average, when you add 10 megahertz of spectrum, you will have 31 billion, or for 100, you will add 3.1 billion in GDP and 100,000 jobs for every 10 megahertz that you add. So if we look at the auction, and a lot of people are throwing around 100 megahertz that we might get, the impact on the US economy is 31 billion in GDP, a million job, 5 billion in government revenue, wireless app sales of $16 billion, because it all becomes easier, faster, cheaper. It's a very powerful argument based on what we have done and demonstrated over the last 10 years.
Yeah.
What more spectrum does for the U.S. economy. It's how can you be against more spectrum for wireless? It's like be against motherhood and apple pie.
And no one's against that. I mean, you're right. It did seem like perhaps in days gone past, there was always the accusation that carriers were just sitting on spectrum, warehousing spectrum. But that was really before kind of the smartphone economy really started driving it. And now, carriers, when they get spectrum, I mean, they're putting it to use as fast as they possibly can. I mean, I know with the AWS spectrum, T-Mobile, when they were getting it, I mean, they couldn't turn that stuff on fast enough. I mean, they were like throwing it out there as quick as they could.
Exactly.
So
the crunch is real.
Yeah.
And Verizon bought AWS spectrum and put it very quickly to use.
Yeah.
AT&T is turning on its WCS spectrum, but it took a while to get all the electronics ecosphere around it.
Yeah.
That takes a while. So all of these things, they're turning on. The licensed carriers are turning it on as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
The only ones that are sitting right now on unused spectrum are, companies that haven't deployed yet. Let's say it this way. But we all hope that they will deploy it very quickly or put it in the hands of the carriers, and so that we can put it to useful life and make it productive for the American people.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, obviously, cable companies, they purchase a lot of spectrum, and in turn, obviously they were looking at
on it for a long time.
They tried to deploy it here and there, perhaps, but for the most part, they figured out, hey, it's probably not the best business model for us. But they sold it off. They put it in the hands of Verizon, for instance, and Verizon, pretty much
deployed it right away.
Yeah, put it to use. I mean, Verizon went so quickly through its AWS spectrum that they're refarming their PCS spectrum now. I mean, AT&T's doing the same thing. I mean, they're looking to shut off their 2G networks so they can free up spectrum for LTE.
Same way T-Mobile. I think Neville Ray said 40% of their calls are VoLTE.
Yeah.
They want to turn off or minimize their GSM part as quickly as possible. Sprint should be on the same path.
Yes.
Especially now that they're adding more customers, but we need more spectrum, and we need not only more spectrum from the spectrum auction, but afterwards. And there are or were bills on the Hill that would provide a pipeline afterwards. And so we need to keep on working on all of that.
Yeah. I mean, it's been great. I mean, obviously, having the current administration come out, almost 6 years ago now, saying they wanted to have so much spectrum out in the market, it really did seem to kind of drive the impetus to get. I mean, we had a great auction last year. Great for the government's treasury, of course, and then an auction coming up this year too. But it's nice to see kind of that flow. But again, I guess looking ahead, I mean, is it time to already start looking past this upcoming auction to see what is next? Okay.
Oh, absolutely. Because it takes on average 6 or 8 years for things to fall into place.
Yeah.
this is not a fast process by any stretch of the imagination. And yes, President Obama promised 500 megahertz. 150 have been delivered. 100 or 120 hopefully come in this auction.
Yeah.
You know, wireless carriers are willing to spend, and if broadcasters are reasonable, I think we will have a very successful auction. But we need more.
Yeah.
And we should not rest on this, oh, we're halfway there. Because if we're resting on halfway there, we'll never get there.
Yes, yes.
And that's my little gripe with the administration, that the progress hasn't been as quick as possible, as one would hope it to be.
Sure, yeah. Well, I mean, I guess, is this also, I guess, an argument a bit against the push towards freeing up more for unlicensed spectrum? I mean, I know that's kind of been argued about. Whenever there's an auction, people on the unlicensed side want to have some of it freed up for themselves. And there's been a lot of work on the licensed side already. I mean, the 5 gigahertz, 3.5 gigahertz. I mean, it seems like there's movement being shown there. But does this, again, the numbers you're putting out here, it does seem like that, at least for the licensed side of things, I mean, the impact it's having on the economy is so dramatic. It seems like, you almost have to question giving up any spectrum for free, basically. I mean, not to say it's used, but is there, I guess, a correlation between licensed and unlicensed and the impact it might have?
I don't think necessarily it's a zero-sum game.
Okay.
I think there should be we should dedicate spectrum for licensed use, and we should dedicate spectrum for unlicensed use.
Okay.
What's important is that unlicensed use means everybody can use it, not just the people who decided not to buy a license, which some people are under the opinion of that would be the case. And we have to remember that unlicensed use is best in small areas. It's a local area solution because you have the limited range, so you don't need a traffic cop, which is the license owner in a wide area solution. So, but I think both, and they're complementary in use. When you look at it, almost every carrier is using Wi-Fi to offload what exists and what they have on the licensed side, because there are use cases where it makes a lot of sense to do that. And look at how fast the reports are of the municipal Wi-Fi in New York City. Wonderful complement to licensed usage. And I don't think anybody takes away something from the other. Yeah. And so I think we're in this together, and we all want to benefit the American consumer, and so we need both.
Yeah, makes sense. Well, obviously, I know with this report you came out with, I think you were mentioning earlier that you're going to start releasing some more numbers leading up to the auction that's scheduled to start in March. That'll be the reverse auction process, and then we'll start with the forward auction process. Again, a very long, complicated auction it's going to be. But again, it does seem like, again, from your numbers, that this is an important auction. I mean, all spectrum is going to be important for the economy. So, as we look at the auction, I mean, do you have any insight at this point? And we're still a couple of months away. What do you expect from this auction, do you think?
I think the auction can be very successful when the numbers have to come together.
Yeah.
And so I think, with the exception of Sprint, and I think for Sprint it was a wise decision not to participate, because even if somebody wins all the spectrum in this auction, it will still have less spectrum than Sprint.
Yeah.
That Sprint sits it out, but all the carriers said they want to invest. Some are more enthusiastic than others. And we just have to, find that place where the possibilities and the ability of the carriers intersects with the aspirations of the broadcasters. And you have some people that have bought it on purely speculative basis, like like Michael Dell. You know, there was a case where he looks like at up to $4 billion profit.
Yeah.
Good for him. Even if he doesn't get all of it.
Yeah.
I think when we look at what has been achieved in past auctions, we come much closer to the truth. What we will see than when we look than some of the numbers that we all heard from some people.
Sure.
Are not that realistic.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah,
we can all wish.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, obviously the AWS3 auction raised a lot of expectations, but again, that perhaps was a ceiling than more than just a stepping stone to maybe higher amounts. So yeah, we'll see how it all plays out going forward. But again, it's going to be an interesting auction. Hopefully, we'll make sure to plan to talk to you again before that auction, because I know that's going to be an interesting process, and you seem to, I know you have a lot of great insight on it as well. So we'll talk again on that. But hey, Roger, again, we appreciate the time talking on the Verizon Sprint results. Obviously, those were big results from the past week. We'll have AT&T coming out soon as well. T-Mobile will provide some more numbers too, so we'll see what happens there. But again, and also the report that you had with CTIA, I definitely recommend people check it out. Again, the numbers that are in that are pretty impressive, and like you were saying earlier, they're even somewhat conservative. So it's
what the industry has done over the first 10 years.
Yeah.
And over the last 4, growth has actually accelerated way above that rate. So I think this is quite sustainable for the future.
Yeah.
And it highlights that we need more spectrum.
Yeah. Very good. Very good. Hey, Roger, again, appreciate the time and insights today, and hopefully we'll talk again soon on the topics. Well, thanks for watching this week's Carrier Wrap. I again want to thank our guest, Sean Kinney, managing editor here at RCR, for joining me, as well as Roger Entner from Recon Analytics. And make sure to check us out again next week.